was a nerdy teenager, about 16 years old, and I had known about the old family cemetery for eons, since I was about 8 years old, when my dad first took me there to show me where my ancestors were buried. But when I got to be about 16 and was able to get around on my own, I got wind of the one of the earlier meetings for the Cemetery Association that had just been formed. Judge J. Everett Thrift, he's now deceased, God rest his soul. He was our first president, our founding president. He was a retired Superior Court judge in Fulton County. And in his retirement, he took it upon himself to form the Cemetery Association to be the caretakers for this historic cemetery, which is Atlanta's oldest Baptist church cemetery. His interest in it was because his first wife was buried there. So Judge Thrift, being a good lawyer, a lawyerly mind, he put together our Articles of Incorporation and our all of our bylaws, and got us officially incorporated as a nonprofit.
Okay.
And that was 1977, and we've been going ever since.
Wow. Okay. Well, this, since it's the oldest, then it's older than Oakland Cemetery.
It's older than Oakland by almost 2 decades.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Well.
And Atlanta. In 1821, for those of you who are history buffs, in 1821, this middle section of Georgia was ceded, or basically given away for a song and a dance, by the Creek or Muskogee Indians to the state of Georgia. And it was divided into 5 really huge counties, which were later subdivided into other smaller counties. But the area that Utoy would end up being in was what was originally Henry County, and that encompassed what's now most of Fulton, all of DeKalb, part of Spalding, and even part of Fayette. All of that was the original Henry County. And then the following year, 1822, the town of Decatur having been founded, the citizens of Decatur petitioned the state to form yet another county, the county of DeKalb, because it was a long distance to travel from Decatur to the courthouse in McDonough. And so the people of Decatur decided they wanted to have a courthouse closer to home. So that's when DeKalb County got formed. Then 2 years after that, August 15th, 1824, a group of pioneer settlers in the western half of DeKalb County, what's now Fulton, in the city of Atlanta, wanted to have a place to worship, so they got together and formed Utoy Baptist Church, as it was called at that time. And that was, as I say, August 15th, 1824. And they originally met in a log cabin, probably somebody's home. We must remember that at this time, all of what's now North Georgia and Metro Atlanta was a wilderness. There were still Creek Indians living here. And in this part of the state, Bartow County, there were Cherokee Indians still living here, in abundance.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So there are family stories handed down in my dad's family, the Whites, about actually seeing some of these Indians before they got shipped out to Oklahoma. So 4 years after the church got founded, this would be the summer of 1828, the congregation moved from that log cabin to a permanent meeting house on the site where it is now, and that's when the cemetery got founded, 1828.
Okay, and it was remodeled.
The building was remodeled after the Civil War because it got burned.
Okay.
Everything in this area got burned by Sherman's troops.
Okay. Well, who's some of the famous people that's buried there?
Well, we've got Atlanta's first doctor, Dr. Joshua Gilbert, and he first arrived in Atlanta. It wasn't even called Atlanta at that point. It was called Marthasville in 1845, and he was Atlanta's first doctor for only about 2 months. And after that, several more doctors arrived. But he and his family are buried in our cemetery. They have their family plot. His brother's family, his brother being Dr. William Gilbert, who was DeKalb and Fulton County's first doctor ever, way back in the 1820s. Dr. William Gilbert's family is buried there. And Dr. William Gilbert himself would have been buried there, but for an accident of fate. And he ended up being buried down in Henry County. And that's another story, but
I'm sure there's a lot of stories connected to this old cemetery.
There are a lot of stories. You look at some of the street names in the city of Atlanta: Lee Street, Childress Drive, Willis Mill Road, Landrum, Bryant Road down at East Point. The list goes on and on. All of these street names are named after families that attended Utoy Church and are buried in our cemetery. White Street in West End, named after my family.
Do they still have burials there?
It is still an active cemetery. We had one as recently as 2010. and the one before that was in 2006.
Okay.
But there are restrictions on who can be buried there. Yes.
Does it have to be family, or does it have to be somebody important?
Family or people who are descendants of early church members of a Utoy Baptist Church, Primitive Baptist Church, or people who are members of the Cemetery Association, like myself, or family members of people in the Cemetery Association.
Okay. Well, who's some of the other people buried there?
Well, back during the 1920s and 1930s, when the cemetery was still pretty open and had a lot of empty plots that people could be buried in, the deacons of Utoy Baptist Church, Primitive Baptist Church, basically sold lots to anybody who came along. And basically, my impression is that Utoy Primitive Baptist Church operated their cemetery pretty much as a poor man's burying ground, a local community burial ground for poor people. So the lots were very affordable. They sold them according to size for $5 and up to about $15 or $20 per lot, depending on how big they were. Of course, back in the 1920s, that was a lot of money.
It was, yeah.
But so we ended up taking in people from all walks of life, all cross sections of Atlanta's cultural and racial makeup. We've got African American burials in Utoy, and one of them we documented. We proved in 2010 that we have an African American burial in Utoy. We suspect there are many, many more. So it truly is representative of the cultural cross-section, of the broad swath of cultural makeup of Metro Atlanta. So
Yeah.
that's why we like to call ourselves Atlanta Cemetery.
Are there any Cherokees or Creeks buried there?
According to tradition, yeah, and that's one tradition we haven't been able to prove, but we've always been told by all the old surviving members of Utoy Primitive Baptist Church that, according to tradition, we've got Indians buried in our cemetery as well.
Is there are they separated in the cemetery, or are they scattered through?
The Indians, it's impossible to say because so many of the graves are unmarked, either completely unmarked or they're just a little simple rock on the ground, the surface of the ground to mark the grave. We do have a lot of marked graves, yes. They're probably about maybe 130, 140 in number that are marked. But the vast majority of the graves are actually unmarked.
Okay.
And so that's why we're right now trying our best to raise funds to get a proper ground-penetrating radar survey done of the entire cemetery.
So you don't know exactly how many people's in that cemetery?
That's correct. We don't know. We can only give you a very rough estimate. I would say maybe 400, maybe 500 people.
Is there many church records left?
Oh yes, quite a number, but not cemetery records.
Okay.
The church records that are left are, in fact, remarkably complete, right from the very beginning. The church minute books, which are at the Georgia Archives in Morrow, Georgia, by the way, the originals, they still exist, although they prefer you look at them on microfilm, even me. The church minute books start from September 1824 and go right up through the 1940s, 1950s. And they are remarkably complete. So they do list people who were members of the church by name.
Okay.
When they were baptized, when they were accepted as members, when they were excommunicated, or when they moved away.
But they didn't keep the cemetery records.
They did not keep cemetery records. They left that up to the individual families, which basically was another way of saying it just didn't get done.
Right.
Yes,
It might be in some family Bibles, but they'd be
Right.
impossible to track down.
Now, on the other hand, in November 1930, the late Franklin Garrett, the famed Atlanta historian, I knew him personally, he did his survey of Utoy Cemetery, and we have a record of that, of course. But Franklin Garrett, even he, as thorough as he was, did not record all the burials in Utoy, all the marked burials
Right.
that he could have recorded. I made my own survey of Utoy in 1982, when I was just a wee lad. And that was, again, not complete, because I missed a few myself. But I've added to it since then. So we do have a record of the marked burials, but it's the unmarked burials that we really want to know about.
Right.
So that's why we really want to get this ground-penetrating radar survey done.
I understand.
Yeah.
Well, what happened in that area during the Civil War?
Oh, absolutely. That's where a lot of the history lies. Now, of course, we do have Revolutionary War soldiers. At least one that's proven. We've got another one or two that are questionable. We've got 2 War of 1812 veterans buried in our cemetery that are proven. But it's where the Civil War comes into play that you really, really get into the interesting history about Utoy. Utoy Church was used as a field hospital, treating the wounded soldiers from both sides, north and south, during the Battle of Utoy Creek. Now, a lot of people have not heard of the Battle of Utoy Creek. The National Park Service website does list it as the Battle of Utoy Creek. But it's not as well known as the other Atlanta area battles like Ezra Church or Peachtree Creek or the Battle of Atlanta or even the Battle of Jonesboro, which sealed Atlanta's fate. Battle of Utoy Creek, however, was, some would argue, just as important. The same federal armies that were engaged at Kennesaw Mountain, at Peachtree Creek, at the Battle of Atlanta, and at the Battle of Ezra Church were also engaged at the Battle of Utoy Creek. It was a battle of almost really the same scope as these other battles. So why is it not so well known?
That's true. I had never heard of it
Yeah.
until I come in contact with you and we started discussing it, and I had never heard of Utoy Cemetery.
Well, there's a simple reason why it's not so well known. It was a Confederate victory. And who writes the history books? The people who win the war.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
the North won the war. Well, there's another fact too, and that is that in the fall of 1864, summer of 1864, Abraham Lincoln was facing re-election, and he did not think he was going to win. He had let it be known to his generals, Grant, and then from Grant to Sherman, that if they lost a battle, they were not to call it a battle, they were to call it a skirmish and downplay it.
Right.
Because Lincoln desperately needed good news for the war, from the war front, to boost his re-election chances. Because there was strong opposition up in the North from the Northern Democrats, strong opposition to the war. And Lincoln really honestly thought he was going to lose this election. So he needed good news. So when the Battle of Utoy Creek ended up being a Confederate victory, and the Federal Army got repulsed when they tried to attack the Confederate trenches, nobody wanted to hear about that. So the result is that Utoy Creek is an almost unheard of battle. There were several of Utoy Church's families that witnessed that battle, and including the White family, which were my ancestors. They were eyewitnesses to that battle.
Did they write it down?
It did got written down, partly by one of my ancestors, my great-great-grandfather, who was 6 years old at the time. He got quoted in an article in the Atlanta Journal newspaper around the year 1938. I've got a copy of the article. And he described what he remembered as a 6-year-old boy, seeing the soldiers shot and cut down right in front of his eyes.
Wow.
A 6-year-old boy seeing that. His family, the Whites, and his uncle's family, great-uncle's family, the Willises, that Willis Mill Road is named after, they spent 3 weeks in an underground bomb-proof shelter right in between the two fighting armies at the Battle of Utoy Creek, right along Willis Mill Road. They had the Confederates on one side and the Federals on the other, and the bullets were literally flying over their heads for 3 weeks. It also got written down by one of the Union generals himself, Brigadier General Jacob Cox, after the war, wrote in his memoirs about meeting my ancestors, the Whites and the Willises. And I can actually quote his very words about when he saw my ancestors and how he reacted to seeing these people emerging from underground. They had not had fresh food for 3 weeks. And Jacob Cox, the general, actually fed my ancestors. He had crude tables prepared during a lull in the battle and fed my ancestors, gave them fresh food. Well, it was, Yankee hardtack, Yankee Army rations.
But it was food.
It was food. It was better than what they had been eating. And thanks to General Cox, my ancestors survived to see another day, and thanks to General Cox, I'm here talking to you.
Wow, great story.
Yeah, it is.
It really is. Well, who are some of the other, I guess you've got quite a few members of your family buried there.
I like to joke that just about everybody buried in Utoy Cemetery is related to me some way, somehow, either by blood or by marriage. Now, of course, there are a lot of people that aren't related to me that are buried there, but easily, I'd say probably 60 to 70% of the people buried there are related to me somehow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Some of them's Alexanders, Belk, Bryant.
Yeah, the Bryants, they're related to me, yes. The Lees, they're related to me.
Huey, Jackson,
Yeah.
Willis.
The Willises are related to me.
And there's a long list of Whites.
So, yeah, a lot of Whites there.
Well, that's great. That's good. You got stories. You got something to, to hang on to there.
And fortunately, because my memory is not what it used to be, fortunately, it's all written down in book form. It's a free ebook available online. for anybody that wants to read about Utoy's history.
How would they get a hold of it? Just
Look up Utoy Primitive Baptist Church, A New History, and it's on the website scribd.com. That's SCRIBD.com. Scribd.com.
I'll have to get that from you before you leave.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, tell us a little bit more about the history of the church. Was there anything else happen there of historical significance, or?
Well, there was a big division within the Baptist faith generally that started around 1837. The Baptist faith underwent a huge split. The more conservative Baptists renamed themselves Primitive Baptists because they wanted to, as they saw it, remain more true to the original primitive form of Christianity, the early form of Christianity, represented by Christ and his apostles and their teachings. Whereas, ironically enough, the more liberal Baptists broke away and called themselves Missionary Baptists, and these more liberal Baptists, quote unquote, guess who they are now? The Southern Baptists. Liberals. I like to joke about how it ended up becoming called a Primitive Baptist Church. Now, I should stress that the Cemetery Association is completely unconnected to any church. We're not against any church, but we're not part of any church either. So we take care of the cemetery. We own the cemetery. We've owned it since 1984. The last remaining surviving members and deacons of Utoy Primitive Baptist Church deeded it to us in 1984.
But there's no actual services.
No. The church building does still exist, but we do not own that part of the property. It has been owned since 1975 by a different congregation.
Okay.
They are a Pentecostal group, and they're fine people. I've met them. They're all very wonderful.
And they have services
They
there?
have services in the old church. So the church building has been continuously occupied since 1828.
Wow, that's
And
amazing.
it still has Sunday services going on every Sunday. Well, General Cox ordered crude. I'm quoting here from his memoirs here. General Jacob Cox ordered crude tables prepared outside their shelter. This was the underground bomb-proof shelter. You got to remember, this was August 5th, August 7th, 1864, and then they stayed underground in that shelter for about the next 3 weeks through the month of August.
Right.
Blackberries grew within a few feet of the entrance, and though they were well supplied with water and non-perishable staples, these were the only fresh foods they enjoyed during those 3 weeks. General Cox said in his memoirs, "In this bomb-proof, 4 families are now living, and I never felt more pity than when, day before yesterday, I looked down into the pit and saw there, in the gloom made visible by a candle burning while it was broad day above, women sitting on the floor of loose boards, resting against each other, haggard and wan, trying to sleep away the days of terror, while innocent-looking children, 4 or 5 years old, among whom was my ancestors, clustered around the air hole, looking up with pale faces and great staring eyes as they heard the singing of the bullets that were flying thick above their sheltering place."
Wow, that's just amazing to me.
It is.
It's
And that was written by one of the Union generals himself.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, we are here with Terrence White, and we are talking about the Utoy Cemetery, and Terry has been very involved with that, and hopefully trying to preserve this historic cemetery.
Indeed.
And it's on the National Register of Historic Places.
Not quite.
Not quite.
It's going to be.
You're going to get it there.
We're on the Georgia Registry of Historic Places. We got approval to be placed on the National Registry. We have been in close correspondence with Dr. David Crass, who is the director of the Historic Preservation Division of the Department of Natural Resources here in Georgia. And he assures us that it is only a matter of time.
Well, great.
So we're just waiting on the, God bless him, we're waiting on the wheels of bureaucracy to turn. But it will happen.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
All right, before we get to the actual preservation of the cemetery, who are some of the important people that worship there at Utoy?
We have, of course, I realize most of your listeners probably have never heard of these people. I would never have heard of them if I hadn't done the research, but we had a guy who was a state senator here in Georgia who worshipped at Utoy Church in the 1820s. In fact, before he became a state senator, he was actually the church clerk. His name was Isaac N. Johnson. And we also had Daniel Stone as a member of Utoy Church. He was clerk of the Superior Court of DeKalb County. He later became the postmaster for the town of Utoy. There was actually a town named Utoy at one point.
And you had a post office.
And we had a post office. We also had Radford Gunn, who was a very prominent Baptist preacher in the 19th century. He's mentioned in the standard reference work on the Baptists in the state of Georgia. So there are several others that are maybe a little less notable than that. But.
Right. Well, it goes to show what an important place it was at that time.
Well, and the reason being is that before Atlanta was founded, Decatur was the nearest town, and that was, 20, 30 miles away from Utoy. Maybe not quite that much, but might as well have been if you were riding on horseback or walking on foot.
Right.
And it was all wilderness back then.
Or a wagon trying to go down. Yeah.
On dirt roads, yes.
Yeah.
So if you were a Baptist in the 1820s and lived in the western half of DeKalb County, that is now Fulton County, and you wanted to go to church, Utoy was your only option. So that's why we had all these politically prominent people that were attending Utoy Church. That was it. It was the only Baptist church back then in that area.
Right. Well, tell us a little bit about William Suttles.
Yes, he is our one proven bona fide Revolutionary War veteran, buried in Utoy Cemetery. He also happens to be my ancestor. I'm descended from one of his daughters. William Suttles was a very Daniel Boone-like character, a very frontiers woodsman type adventurer. There are several very interesting stories about William Suttles. Some of his descendants drop the final S of the name and pronounce it Suttle. There's one branch of the family in Kentucky that still spells it the old-fashioned original way, S-E-T-T-L-E.
Suttles.
Settle, without the final S also.
Oh, okay.
William Suttles was a famous gunsmith in his lifetime. Now, of course, he's completely unknown today to most people. But in his day, he was very famous as a gunsmith. We are assured by his obituary, which appeared in 1839. He manufactured what we now call the Kentucky long rifle. But it's kind of a misnomer because it was actually invented by gunsmiths that were Pennsylvania Dutch in Pennsylvania, or Pennsylvania Germans, in other words.
Yeah.
So calling it the Kentucky long rifle is kind of a misnomer. But William Suttle, or Settle, had a nephew that went to Kentucky, and his name was also William Settle. William Settle and his son and grandson manufactured their version of this Kentucky long rifle, and it actually got named after them. Their rifles that they made themselves, they're called the Settle rifles to this day, and I understand they're highly prized by collectors. Look them up on eBay. You'll find them for sale on eBay. Settle rifles, yeah. But
Okay.
William Suttles, instead of going to Kentucky, he came south to Georgia and brought a whole slew of families with him from Franklin County down to this area, to DeKalb County, in what's now Fulton. That was in the year 1822.
And he was captured by Indians?
That was during the American Revolution, when he was serving during the American Revolution, probably in North Carolina. And this is a family tradition that he was captured by Indians. And very interesting story, because so many of his descendants have preserved this story independently of each other. Genealogists believe there's probably something to it, because people wouldn't make something up and then have it be identical in a different branch of the family that hadn't seen each other in 150 years.
Right.
So the effect of the story goes that because he was a gunsmith, he repaired the guns of his captors, the Indians that had captured him. And because of that, he gained their trust, and they eventually allowed him to hunt alone. And it was on one of these hunting expeditions that he managed to escape, gain his freedom, and find his way back home. He supposedly traveled by night and hid during the day to avoid being recaptured by the Indians.
Wow.
Yes.
And you've got some 1812 veterans there?
We do have two bona fide, proven War of 1812 veterans there. One was a captain, Captain Isom Hendon, Hendon, and one of his descendants is a member of our association to this day. The other War of 1812 veteran is my ancestor, Jacob White. He was a private. He helped construct several forts down in the central Georgia area near what's now Pulaski County, in that area.
Okay, and there was William Rattery?
William Rattery is a Spanish-American War veteran, and he was a nephew of a older man named Rattery, Colonel Alexander Rattery, who was one of the original landowners of what's now East Point and College Park, and he used to own most of the land that is now East Point and College Park. He was a huge landowner, but he was also in his day and time one of the most litigious citizens of Georgia. He just seemed to enjoy filing lawsuits against people and corporations. And he seems to have lost every penny he ever owned because of these lawsuits, because he died as a pauper.
Wow.
In the poorhouse. Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, tell us a little bit about the preservation. What are you doing besides the ground penetration to preserve this cemetery?
Well, we're a small nonprofit. We are an IRS registered 501c13 nonprofit. It's the same thing as a 501c3, except the category 13 is for cemeteries. So we are tax exempt. We, however, are very small. We operate primarily out of pocket. What gets done is what we ourselves, the members, pay for out of our own pockets. So it's entirely voluntary, entirely volunteer, I mean to say, and really and truly a labor of love. So what gets done is what we pay to make get done.
Right.
All the grounds maintenance, the upkeep, every time a big dead tree falls and knocks out some tombstones, we are the ones that have to deal with that.
I don't think people realize how expensive that is.
It runs into the thousands and
Yes.
tens of thousands of dollars. I've got the spreadsheets that show you our budget layouts for the last several years, and it's all right there in black and white. Yes.
Yeah. I think most places charge up to $2,500 to remove a tree.
Yes, that's
And if
right.
it's one of those huge ones, I'm sure it'd probably be more than that.
That's right, and I promise you, Utoy has got some ancient oak trees,
Yeah.
200 and 300 years old.
And then the repairs on some of these headstones.
These headstones are irreplaceable. They can maybe be patched up and repaired, but once they're cracked, it's cracked forever.
Right.
You might be able to glue it back together with some of this, marble or granite cement, but
Have you had any problems with vandalism? I know we have here in this county.
fortunately not recently. Utoy was seriously vandalized back in 1971 when I was just a small boy, so I wasn't even really aware of it at the time. But you can still see the damage, the result of that vandalism to this day, because there are numerous cracked and damaged tombstones at Utoy, or tombstones that have portions missing,
Right.
which can never be replaced. Well, and there's
Yes.
another form of vandalism too, and it's not intentional vandalism, but it's just as insidious and just as damaging, and that is the acid rain that erodes and eats away the marble so that the inscriptions on the tombstones can no longer be read. We have a serious problem. Look at those priceless, irreplaceable, 150-plus-year-old gravestones at Utoy that are no longer readable. They're no longer legible. The inscriptions cannot be read anymore.
I just wonder if some of these very old ones, before they get too bad, if we, there's got to be some way to cover them, to keep the elements off them so bad.
I would think so. Maybe spray. You can buy these products at your local home supply stores, where you will spray on a clear coat of polyurethane, and mostly I see that's used for wood products, but I don't see why it couldn't be applied to stone as well.
Yeah.
And maybe that might help slow it down at least.
Or make some little cabins to go on
Yeah,
top of.
yeah. The last resort, of course, would be to remove the tombstone and take it indoors somewhere.
Right.
Maybe maybe into a museum or something.
And put something else
Put something
up.
else out at the
Right.
actual grave. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we have that problem here, and we're trying to figure out what to do with it. A lot of these cemeteries, we may just have to list the names before it's eventually going off the stone.
That's right. Well, part of our goal of getting the ground penetrating radar survey done is to create an online database that links up with the survey, so that on the online list or database of all the marked burials, for example, where you have each person's name, if you were to click on that person's name, it would bring you up a little pop-up box, which would give you everything we know about that person.
Okay.
A little mini biography there, and including a photograph of the person, a photograph of the tombstone, as it is now, because we know that 200 or 300 years from now, these tombstones are going to be eroded away.
Right.
They will not be there anymore.
Yeah. Have y'all done a plat showing where each stone is today?
That's part of the survey and mapping that will be taking place. We are right now in the negotiating stage to make the first part of that happen. So we know it is going to happen.
Have you found out how much it's going to cost you?
Yes, it's going to cost us at least 10 grand. We've already come up with almost 2,000 ourselves, just out of pocket. And I believe we have commitments now for maybe another 1,000 or 2,000 to make it about a $4,000 beginning, so that we can at least get part of the cemetery mapped,
Right.
so that we can at least get the process going. But it's going to be easily 10,000 for the whole cemetery and to create that online database.
Well, if you're interested in giving and helping them save this cemetery, grab a piece of paper and a pencil, and before the end of the show, we'll let you know how you can help them. And but yeah, I mean, it's a problem in every cemetery.
Right.
You just really don't know what to do to save them, the right thing to do to save them.
Among other things that we're hoping to do is get the involvement of Atlanta's African American community, because we know we have at least one proven African American burial at Utoy. And as I say, we suspect there are a lot more than just that one.
Right. Well, most of those
Were unmarked.
right. They could not afford.
Right.
And not just the blacks, the whites. There was a lot of them could not afford a stone.
True. Very true. And I'm always adamant about this point, and that is, these people deserve to have their burial places honored and respected and tenderly cared for. Doesn't matter if they were rich, poor, white, black, red, yellow, black, or in between.
Yeah.
It does not matter. These are all human beings. They're all children of God. They deserve to be respected and honored.
You're a man after my own heart.
Well, thank you.
We are kindred spirits there. Because, you talk about history, everybody loves the history. Everybody loves hearing the stories and seeing the history. But these are the people that made the history.
Yes.
These are the people that came here, built the churches, the schools, the communities, and had the children that made us. And we can't forget them.
Somebody famous, I forget who it is right now, once said that great events get written up as history, but history was lived by the ordinary people.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
And I
right.
paraphrased.
Yeah. But these folks are important.
They were
to every
important.
county,
They were
to
important
every
to
church.
somebody.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And they still should be important.
Of course.
And we've got several cemeteries here that's got prominent people. We want to preserve that. We want to, we have people come here from out of state and from out of the country and look at our cemeteries, and it's a pride thing, one,
Right.
and it's another that they come and they see this and they think, well, they don't care about the people that come before them.
Right. Well, then you consider a city like New Orleans, where they celebrate their cemeteries.
Yes.
Their
Yep.
cemeteries are spectacles. And they are very well-liked and beloved, even. Taken pride in by the citizens of New Orleans. And, I mean, there are other cities that are very similar. I don't see why Atlanta can't be like that. I truly don't. And by extension, all of North Georgia and all the different counties around here,
Right.
including Bartow.
Does Atlanta have a cemetery association that they help in any way keep any of their cemeteries up?
Not that I'm aware, not a big umbrella group. Now, I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, somebody please correct me. I'd like to know. But I really get, now we have liaison with different groups. Like we've been in close cooperation with the people at Oakland,
Mm-hmm.
and they are very aware of us, and we have cooperated with them, and they with us. There are other cemeteries like the Sylvester Cemetery in Atlanta that we've also been very closely working with, and Greenwood Cemetery. That's a for-profit cemetery, by the way, but we have been working closely with them, and we have actually benefited a great deal from the help we received from them
Right.
and from the Oakland people. So
Well, I know here, as from what we can tell by checking, we're still looking into it, but the only thing here that's funded by the county or the city is the city cemetery.
That's right.
Which is Oak Hill here, and it's downtown. But that's the only funding for any cemetery. So if it's going to get done, it's going to take the people doing it.
absolutely, and that's the point I was just about to make, and you are absolutely right. You and I are kindred spirits, because this is what I was about to say. Folks, our politicians will not lift a finger to do anything unless you and I, the voters, demand it.
That's right.
So it all starts with you and me. All you people listening to this right now, it starts with you and me. We have to make the cemeteries important to us, and only when they are important to us will they ever be important to our elected officials.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that all elected officials are bad. There are some really good people out there
Right.
that are really trying to help us. We have actually had people with the city council, Atlanta City Council, work closely with us. We've had people in the local neighborhood planning unit, NPUS, work closely with us, and we're very grateful for everything they've done for us. They've been a great help to us in many instances.
Right.
But there can be a lot more done, a lot more done.
Yeah.
And especially there can be a lot more community involvement.
Well, that's what we're going to have to do here in this county. And I got a phone call from a young man who's with the Boy Scouts. And I don't remember the troop right off the top of my head. But he's offered to come out and take over one of these cemeteries and clean it up, build benches for the families to come sit, and a pathway to get through them, because a lot of them are just vines and a mess. And I thought that's great. The youth want to get involved, and
That's wonderful.
if your youth want to get involved, you're going to get there.
Absolutely, that's wonderful, and God bless him.
Yeah.
More power to him.
Yep. Yep. It was a joy to get that phone call.
I bet it was.
You know, I wish more people would step up. You know, more. We're going to have people adopt these cemeteries.
Yes,
You know,
that's right.
some organization or some church or somebody step up and say, I will keep this little cemetery up.
And I can tell you from my experience, it will not just be the families who represent descendants of the people buried there, because if that were the case, we would never have gotten anything done at Utoy, because we have so many families represented at Utoy, people buried there, whose descendants we never hear from and have never heard from.
Well, the problem around here
And probably
is
never will.
a lot of them have moved away, or a lot of them have died out.
That's right.
And there's not that many families from then, but that doesn't mean we need to forget them.
That's right. That's where the community involvement comes
Right.
in. So does it matter that you don't have ancestors buried there? No, it should not.
Should
It's your
not.
community. It's your community cemetery.
Yep.
You should take pride in it.
And 200 years from now, you'd want somebody taking care of yours.
Absolutely. That's exactly how I feel. Do I want my name, my life to be forgotten 50 years from now, 100 years from now when I'm dead and gone? No, I want someone to remember me.
Yeah.
Well, how do you think those people felt? They probably felt exactly the same way.
That's right. And you was talking about the website, clicking on it and going to what you could find on the families. We're going to do the same thing on our Facebook page on the cemetery, the Bartow Ancestors Cemetery Fund. We're going to highlight some of these families as we clean them up and all.
Right.
So tell us if people want to help and send you a check, donate what they can, where do they send it to?
Right. We've got a website. It's utoycemeteryinc.org. I'll spell that out for you. utoycemeteryinc.org. There is a page on that site for you to donate. All your donations are tax deductible. You just let us know. We'll give you our taxpayer ID number with the IRS, and boom, you're off. You're in business. We also have a Facebook page, Utoy Cemetery Association, Inc., on Facebook. We have an event coming up in August, which will be our homecoming service, and it's also commemorating the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Atlanta. And I will be the featured speaker there. You'll get to hear me again.
Well, tell us how to get to it.
Facebook page. There's a Facebook event that's all about that. So go to our Facebook page again, Utoy Cemetery
Well,
Association.
there's a lot of people that's not on Facebook.
Yeah.
So tell them how to get to the cemetery from Cartersville
Okay.
or from Bartow County.
Right, from Bartow County, go south on Interstate 75. You can either go around 285 or go right through town on 75 if you want. It's up to you. You're going to need to get onto the Langford Parkway, either from 285 or from 75. And then Langford Parkway you will take to the Lee Street, Main Street, East Point exit. And go north from there about half a mile to Campbellton Road, then west on Campbellton Road about half a mile to Venetian Drive, and then Venetian Drive runs due west almost exactly a mile, and then there will be Venetian Hills Elementary School on the south side of Venetian Drive, and then the little tiny church, Temple of Christ Pentecostal, that used to be Utoy, is right across the street from that school, and then our little cemetery is right behind the Temple of Christ Pentecostal
Okay,
Church.
and in March you do
I do lecture tours in conjunction with the Atlanta Preservation Center's Phoenix Flies program. It's a series of cultural events and tours that are exist solely to promote Atlanta's historic-minded nonprofits. And I give lecture tours at Utoy every March, twice in March, and on demand. If you show up and want a tour, give us a ring. We'll be glad to meet you there.
okay. And if y'all didn't get the directions, go to Google.
Yes,
and Google it, and
yes.
it'll show you right where it is.
Our Facebook page can get you there. There are directions there, also the website. And if you don't do internet, talk to somebody who does.
That's right. Yeah, and hopefully have a GPS.
Yes.
Okay. Terry, thank you very much for
Thank you
coming
so much
in.
for having me.
Enjoyed it very much. It was finally good to meet you too. Y'all